Happy Halloween, witches, wizards, and warlocks. We got some more Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers. That's what we're doing for a Halloween video. Nothing kooky or spooky going on around here. Just previews, but they are scary good. A lot of them, at least. We got another 23 cards in one of the bigger days of preview season that we've gotten since the beginning, and a lot of them look good. There wasn't even really a lot of like crummy lower rarity stuff, at least not till the end of the day, when stuff like Tendril of the Micro Tyrant, Dreadmaw's Iron, Synapse Necromancer started rolling out our way. Some of these do look okay, but we'll look at Tendril of the Micro Tyrant first. Hey, it's a 2-mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 fungus wizard. You can pay 5 and 2 green to put 7 +1/+1 counters on a non-creature land you control. It becomes a 0/0 fungus creature with haste that is still a land. I'm going to let you know that I have done way too many takes for what is basically a completely inconsequential card, so let me just boil it down to this. That's 7 mana. It's really 8 when you get to thinking about it. You probably want to swing with the land you're animating that turn. You don't have to. Don't let me tell you how to play, but I guess you could make the argument that over like 3 turns in the late game in limited, we're talking about limited here, maybe you animate like 3 different lands, you got a bunch of 7/7s, you win the game. It could happen. So I don't think this is barred from seeing limited play. We like to call this a 23rd card. There's usually about 23 non-land cards in your limited deck and about 17 lands, give or take. So if you're building your limited deck and you're getting towards the end of your deck building process and maybe you need a little 2-drop that's not super embarrassing, does something in the late game, boom, this guy's okay. So you could have this guy end up in your limited deck, and it doesn't mean you're doing things wrong, but there's probably a better option a lot of the time. As a matter of fact, Ramp looks like a viable strategy in limited when it comes to this set, so this dude might be a little better than I'm judging him, but probably not. So I'm going to move on to a combat trick, and a pretty decent one too. It's Dreadmaw's Ire, a single red mana for an instant. Until end of turn, target attacking creature gets +2/+2 and gains trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, destroy target artifact that player controls. Okay, so not going to replace like Monstrous Rage and Mono Red anytime soon, but still a pretty decent little combat trick. The trample is going to be nice most of the time, and destroying an artifact is just kind of gravy, right? It's just icing, frosting, whatever. I use a bunch of words for the same thing, but still, I think it's pretty decent gravy in this limited environment where you're almost always going to have some artifact or another to bust up. There's a ton of them. By the way, it's not just map tokens, right? We've seen lots and lots of artifacts already in this set, and we'll see a bunch more as we move through the day. Just note, there's kind of a lot of artifacts about. So this is probably going to cause some extra value for you, some really decent extra value as well, a lot of the time in limited. So if you're playing some sort of aggro strat for sealed or drafts, then maybe keep your eye out if you're in red for a card like this, because I think the extra value is actually going to be easy to get and pretty sweet most of the time. Let's look at Synapse Necromage next. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 3/1 fungus wizard, and when it dies, you create 2 1/1 black fungus creature tokens with this creature can't block. So that's kind of neat. You get the rats of this set, little dudes that can't block. Sucks they can't do that, but they can just be more sacrifice fodder, right? This one guy sacrificed to a Bartholomew makes him like a 5/5 once you eat all of the mushrooms involved. I mean, your Bartholomew's going to be tripping, but he's going to be really, really big too. So that's kind of nice. Again, I think this is a limited trick more than anything. There is an Aristocrats deck like kind of cooking up in standard, something in the pot right now, but I'm not sure that it plays this, even though this is basically 3 bodies on 1 card, and Aristocrats decks tend to really like that. I'm just not sure they're hard up enough for something like this. We also got Cogwork Wrestler, Hoverstone Pilgrim, and Capricody Sunborn to kind of finish off the not super consequential or interesting stuff. Now, Cogwork Wrestler is cool. He looks great. He's just a single blue mana for a 1/2 gnome. He's an artifact creature with flash. And when he enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-0 till end of turn. I don't think this guy's going to be taking any titles anytime soon. He's not going to be the champion of the world or anything, but he is pretty cool. Again, maybe in limited where he satisfies some things, right? He's an artifact. We were just talking about that. He's got enough flash, he can do some cool combat trick stuff and like mess up combat math for your opponent. He's not terrible, but I just really don't think that he's going to be stepping outside that limited ring anytime soon. Now, Hoverstone Pilgrim may not be a wrestler, but he is pretty cool. He's 5 mana for a 2/5 golem with flying and ward 2. You can also pay 2 to put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. So you can mess around with their reanimation strats or whatever, like how many permanents are in their graveyard and limited. Who knows? I pay a few mana and now your descended stuff doesn't work. So that's kind of interesting. But again, this isn't actually that cool. It's just a card you might play in limited, but even that is kind of debatable. Let's move on to Caparok the Sunborn here. I think I nailed it that time. Definitely said its name wrong the first time now that I'm really reading its name. All apologies. 4 mana, 2, a red and a white for a 4/4 legendary human soldier. Whenever it attacks, you may tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. If you do, discover 3. Okay, so discover 3 is kind of nice, but you got to wait for it to attack, so I don't really care as much. I guess this is another thing for the Ixalan deck in standard. We got that going for us, right? But I'm still not quite sure that it actually gets there. Sorry. All right, so let's look at some removal next. That's always relevant, right? Let's check out Triumphant Chomp. Great name for a card. Petrify and Calamitous Cave-In. Now, Triumphant Chomp is just a single red mana for a sorcery. It deals damage to target creature equal to 2 or the greatest power among dinosaurs you control, whichever is greater. Okay, so you're always shocking a creature, but it's not too hard to strangle a creature. I am going to get demonetized. And it's even not hard to char a creature, perhaps, or lava axe a creature. Do we have a word for that? I'm not actually sure, but yeah, all of these are actually just numbers if you know magic language, and a lot of you, it turns out, do, so that's good. But for those who don't, those are just the numbers 3, 4, and 5, so I'm pretty sure it's fairly easy to deal at least 4 damage with this on like turn 3 with no difficulties. So it's probably not bad. If you want a removal spell for your dinosaurs deck, it goes in, and I think you do want that. That dinosaurs deck is going to play a bunch of big boys and it wants to play them on curve, so it's not going to have a whole lot of extra mana just laying around to do other stuff. It's not going to get the double spell on the same turn super often, so I do think these 1 mana removal spells are going to be really important for its existence. But let's move on. First, I was afraid. I was petrified. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for an enchantment that is an aura and enchants an artifact or a creature. Enchanted permanent can attack or block, and its activated abilities cannot be activated. Man, pacifism just keeps getting better and better. Poor Grack, or whatever his name is in the flavor text of the Mirage Pacifism. I miss him. Anyway, Pacifism's a good card. So is this. It's strictly better than Pacifism, but it's not like we haven't seen a strictly better Pacifism recently. We got like 7 of those at this point. So there's multiple of them in standard. I don't think this does anything more than like ossification is already doing, right? But in limited, make no mistake, this is just unbelievably good premium removal. Also, before I move on, I have to point out, because if I don't, somebody else in the comment section is just going to like think that I didn't know the card does this. Yeah, it can target artifacts with it too. Pacifism doesn't usually do that, so that's kind of good, right? Especially if you're keeping them from activating some awesome artifact. So is it commander playable? Probably not, to be honest with you, but I do appreciate the spread of different permanent types it can hit. But Calamitous Cave-In, man, let's check this thing out. This is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a sorcery that deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker, where X is the number of caves you control plus the number of cave cards in your graveyard. Okay, so this Caves deck is looking better every day, man. It really is. I hate that, like, you're playing Bat Cavern on 3 into this on 4. That's not a great curve, but still, all that aside, you're going to be able to make X equal 4 on this. Like, really, it's going to be a languish, like, a lot of the time on turn 4, especially considering now we know we have untapped caves. There's another comes into play untapped cave that we're going to look at a little bit later today. So, game on this Caves deck, dude. We've got, like a thing that makes tokens that's actually like pretty decent on rate, and now we have like an honest to god sweeper, you know. And on turn 4, if you've been able to like put some caves in your yard up to that point, then suddenly this can do like 6, 7 damage, and I think that's somewhat realistic too. All of that, and it's really easy to cast too. You only need 1 red mana and then 3 of anything else in the whole world to cast this thing, man. I'm not sure that the Caves deck is going to be 5 colors, but if it is, I think it can make those colors really easily thanks to some of the caves that we've already seen, right? We got one that turns all your caves into City of Brasses or Mana Confluence, whichever you prefer. So, you know, this deck is actually looking pretty good in terms of like being able to make the mana that it needs and getting the cards that it needs. And this is just the newest in what is becoming a long-ish line of amazing looking pieces for this deck. So I'm starting to get excited about it. Now, to be succinct about this portion of the video, removal is good, and the cards we're looking at right now are about 3 times better than some of the cards I'm about to show you, but they're not half again as interesting as those same cards. So let's move on to Inverted Iceberg next. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an artifact. When it ETBs, you mill a card and then you draw a card. You can also craft with artifact for 6 6 mana, 4 and 2 blue. These craft costs, man. And you get Iceberg Titan. It's a 6/6 artifact creature. It's a golem, and when it attacks, you may tap or untap target artifact or creature. So not a huge bonus for actually making this thing work, right? But I will say this one more time because I've only said it like once, which surprises even me. I really should have hammered this in by now. But all of these little artifacts that do something kind of neat when they come into play and then they craft for 1 billion mana in the late game, these are actually pretty sweet little bargain things if you're playing like Beseech the Mirror or some other card in Standard that bargains. They printed a whole bunch of those in the last set. You remember we were all excited about it? We finally got the artifacts that have like an ETB trigger, and then maybe they do something later but they don't have to. They make perfect bargain targets. So just want to throw that back out there one more time. But draw discard is actually kind of neat, especially when you're getting an artifact for whatever sick purposes you have, you little weirdo. So I could see just that being okay. But if you do flip it into a big old guy in the late game, that's good too. Not going to see standard play though. A neat card, I think, to have in limited. So let's look at another craftable here. It's the Healy's Lattice. 2 mana, 1 and a red for an artifact. When an ETBs, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards. You can also craft with one or more dinosaurs for 4 into red. And if you do that, you get Mastercraft Raptor. It's a star 4 artifact creature dinosaur. Raptor's power is equal to the total power of the exiled cards used to craft it. So it's kind of a tormenting voice on the front half, which is kind of neat. Tormenting voice that leaves a permanent in play. I've always liked that. We've got one in standard right now, but it's an enchantment. That one's pretty decent. This one's an artifact. You see where I'm going. So I guess that's not too terrible just on the front face, but I guess you can mash together like 3 dinosaurs and make them kiss and have a big old baby that's like all their power. It could be okay, but honestly, this is just yet another limited piece. I just thought it was kind of cool. But we're like 15 minutes into the video at this point. I know what you're thinking. Dev, I'm kind of done with the limited cards, and I don't blame you. But don't worry, we've just hit a pretty promising vein here. This is a land, it's a cave, and you can tap for a colorless, or you can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice it to search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. You know, weirdly, not a huge fan of the kind of terramorphic expanse ability on this thing. I mean, you'll use it from time to time, right? It kind of sucks that it costs mana or whatever, but the relevant thing about this is that it is a third, at least, enters the battlefield untapped cave. There may be 4 by now, actually, but long story short, we are definitely getting enough comes into play untapped lands to justify some of these like token makers and sweepers that we're seeing. So just for that raw fact, if nothing else, I'm kind of excited about it. Now, we've looked at a couple of crappy craft artifacts today, so let's look at one that I actually think has some promise. It's Oteklan Arch. This is 1 white mana for an artifact. When an ETBs, you scry 2. You can also craft with an artifact for 2 and a white, and you get Oteklan Levitator, a 1/4 artifact creature with flying that is also a golem. And when it attacks, target attacking creature without flying gains flying until end of turn. These are usually pretty common to see in limited, right? A flying guy that attacks and gives a dude flying, but I actually kind of like this a little bit, maybe for standard. I don't know that it's quite there, but it is a single mana for an artifact that scries 2. That is really not bad on ETB. If you flicker it, you get it again. You return it to your hand and cast it for 1 mana, you get it again. Scrying is pretty sweet, right? But apart from that, it's a really low mana investment. If you do bargain it away or something, good on you. But if you want to craft it, it is very, very cheap to craft it. Extremely cheap. Like anytime I see something that's cheap to craft, I am keeping my eye on it. You know, for 3 mana, you get yourself a 1/4 flyer that can't be go for the throated. That also gives like your biggest dude every turn flying. I actually don't think that's terrible. It's a relatively big mana commitment, but just something about it, man. You know, the initial investment's good, and some decks might like a piece like this. So it's really, really narrow, and it's going to have like niche applications, but I think they might be there beyond limited. But in limited, it's quite good. You'll be crafting this with other artifacts, not only for its own ability, but for other artifacts' craft abilities a lot of the time, I imagine. And if nothing else, it scries you 2 for a single mana. You sack it to Bartholomew, and he gets a counter, whatever. So just has a lot of, uses in the limited environment, but even beyond. Now, we've only got a couple more uncommons to show you before we get to the rares from today, and they are uncommons that I think might have some standard viability. But before we get there, I figured now's a good time to tell you that they reprinted Sorcerer's Spyglass. This is 2 mana for an artifact, in case you've never seen it. As it enters the battlefield, you look at an opponent's hand and then you choose a card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they are mana abilities. So I feel like at this point I'm just trained when I see stuff like this to be like the One Ring in Modern, but well, we've had Sorcerer's Spyglass in Modern the whole time and it doesn't stop the One Ring. I feel like this is Wizards just like poking us in the rib with their elbow. Like, you guys remember this card exists, right? We have to reprint it to, to get you to use it. I'm pretty sure this doesn't stop the One Ring in Modern. Again, it already existed. Nobody was doing that. So, there is that. But it is always a good card to have access to in basically any format. You throw it in your sideboard, it does wondrous things depending on the matchup. Maybe it's supposed to stop Cauldron decks in Standard and Pioneer and stuff. I don't know. I'm just taking guesses. So let's move on to Zoyawa, Lava Tongue, and Kutzel, Malamet Exemplar. Now, Zoyawa, I really, really like. This is a black and a red for a 2/2 legendary Goblin Warlock with Death Touch. And at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, each opponent may discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Zoyawa Lava Tongue deals 3 damage to each opponent who didn't do those things. I want to just be like, well, 2-mana 2/2 Death Touch, that's pretty good. But like, Ella Silcor is a 2-mana 2/2 Death Touch. It's my favorite creature in the history of Magic. And, she's not good just because she's those things. You know what I mean? She hasn't seen Standard play because of that. And this guy is probably a little bit harder to proc than you think he is. And he only triggers once per turn. And he has like a Braids-like ability where like they don't actually care that much. In the early game, they're like, yeah, sure, I'll just take 3. And then in the late game, they're like, sure, I'll sacrifice. Who cares? So, I'm not actually sure how good this little dude is, but I really do like him. I want this to be playable in Anvil, but I want every Rakdos card to be playable in Anvil, so it's no guarantees. So let's move on to Kutzel, Malamet Exemplar. This is 3 mana, 1 a green and a white for a 3/3 legendary cat warrior. I like him. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. I like him even better. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So yeah, super strange wording on that, and it's kind of tough to read, to be honest. Thanks, Wizards, but you're only drawing 1 extra card a turn off of this. That said, totally cool with it, man. 3 mana, 3/3. I used to say those aren't embarrassing stats, but like, I don't know anymore, to be honest with you. But a 3 mana, 3/3 is fairly stout. I really like that first line of text, and I think that anything that occurs beyond the first line of text, in Standard at least, is just kind of frosting at that point. But it's pretty good frosting. You know what I mean? It sucks that this dude does not have greater power than his base power by himself, but it shouldn't be too hard to engineer that. And honestly, he doesn't even have to be bigger than he is. He doesn't even have to attack. He can kind of hang back, clean himself. He's a cat, do whatever he wants. He's independent. He's not going to do what you tell him, but your other guys can attack and deal combat damage. You draw some cards. Seems pretty sweet and probably Commander playable if literally nothing else. And it might be nothing else, but Commander playability is a real thing. It turns out it's the format most people play. So I think it's pretty important when you're playable in Commander. Not too sure it's going to see much play in Standard, but the people who are still trying to keep the green-white counters deck alive are going to maybe want this. Last thing about this, by the way, I keep just freaking out about the sort of your things can't be countered because they can't play spells during your turn, but that also means they have to devote mana on their turn to like go for the throat and cut down and stuff, and they can't mess with you during combat, and that is much better than you think it is. It is so much better than uncounter abilities, so at least it's got that going for it too. If it actually resolves, they're not doing anything to it that turn. So they're not doing anything to anything that turn if this thing resolves. So that is pretty sweet. And I think that just that sort of almost tempo gain, if you want to put it that way, could mean something. But something's got to be the first rare of the day, and this time it's Warden of the Inner Sky, a 1-drop soldier at rare. So how is this possibly the first rare of the day? It's just a single white mana for a 1/2 human soldier. As long as there are 3 or more counters on Warden of the Inner Sky, it has flying and vigilance. Tap 3 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control to put a +1/+1 counter on Warden and scry 1. Activate only as a sorcery. Ouch. Why is it only as a sorcery? This made the card like terrible, man. So it's a 1 mana 1/2 for probably a very long time in most games of Magic. It's a 1/2 for like 3 turns. It's just a banalish hero. Like, who cares? You know what I mean? But then I guess you can take all of your shields down and not attack that turn or block the next turn to put a single counter on. This card's probably bad, right? Am I nuts on this one? Like, I guess if you can proliferate or put counters on it some other way, and then suddenly it's like a 3/4 flying or whatever, 4/5 flying. It's got to have 3 counters on it. So it'll be a 4/5 flying eventually. But like, that eventuality is months away in terms of magic time. You know, if it doesn't become a 4/5 flyer until turn 6, and until then it's basically just a chump blocker. I bet it's not getting to turn 6 is all I'm saying. And my opponent's not going to have to cast a removal spell. They're just going to have to attack enough. I don't know, man. I know it can tap artifacts too. So if you get some tokens out and it taps the tokens, it may be right, but I'm just not seeing this. Like, there has to be a deck or two that can take advantage of this again by tapping the artifacts down. But even then, you tap the artifacts. Ooh, it's a 2/3. Ooh, you know, so I don't care that much. I'm truly, part of my brain is trying to stick up for this card, and I just can't do it. But hey, at least you get scries, am I right? But I don't know. Let's move on to Deep Fathom Echo. That card's probably better than I think it is, but anyway. Echo is 4 mana, 2, a green, and a blue for a 4/4 Merfolk Spirit. At the beginning of combat on your turn, Deep Fathom Echo explores. Then you may have it become a copy of another creature you control until end of turn. So that's pretty cute, because you'll turn it into copies of other creatures, but it'll still have +1/+1 counters from exploring. I see what you did. That's very cute. It can also just get you lands. Cool. You know, attack, get lands, whatever, but you still have to wait for it to attack for an entire turn. It's just a 4 mana 4/4. That is also not impressive anymore, especially with no actual abilities. You have to have other creatures on the table to make it good. You have to have good creatures to make it good. So I don't know, man. I'm just not super into this either, but it is kind of tricksy. I know that people like copying stuff, and this is basically the same cost as clone to copy a different creature every turn and possibly get card advantage and make him bigger. So like, I can see how some people might look at this and get the big eyes, you know what I mean? Like, ooh, maybe, but hate to bust your burbles in your dreams there, Palo, but I'm just not sure that this is the tree you want to be barking up. But hey, you live your truth. You know what I mean? You try to make it a thing and you report back to me, but I don't have the highest hopes. But all right, we did it. We got to a card I really, really like, but it's still probably, I'm just going to be 100% with you here. Not a great card, but I really like this thing. It's Corpses of the Lost, 3 mana, 2 and a black for an enchantment. Skeletons you control get +1/+0 and have haste. When Corpses of the Lost enters the battlefield, you create a 2/2 black skeleton pirate creature token. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, you may pay 1 life. If you do, return Corpses of the Lost to its owner's hand. Skeletons, let's go. Like, just anytime I see support for skeletons, I'm kind of happy about that. We don't have enough of it. I want to build skeletons in like Commander, just casual and have a good time. I'm building the mono black Halloween cube right now. This card would go in, even though I'm trying to keep down on the number of cards that create tokens. This would go in because skeletons is like one of the relevant creature types in the cube, and it's only got a couple of cards for support, so I would definitely throw this in. I'm excited about this card just existing, but I'm not sure it does a whole heck of a lot, honestly, outside of like extremely narrow Commander applications for nerds who like skeletons, and I'm one of them. So I get to be excited about this, but I completely understand if you are not. This is the inverse of the last card we looked at. But let's move on to Oer Cassum, the Deepest Growth. 5 mana, 3 and 2 green for a 6/5 legendary god with trample. Whenever Oer Cassum deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. Put a creature card and or a land card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. When Oer Cassum dies, return to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control, and you get Temple of Cultivation. This is a land that taps for green. You can also pay 2 a green and tap it and transform it. Activate only if you control 10 or more permanents and only as a sorcery. So you have to hit the city's blessing to return this, kind of a counter to all the descended stuff. You have to ascend to actually get this flip back over and make it a creature. It is cool. I mean, I think like basically every single one of these like gods that turn into lands and then flip back over after some condition is met are pretty good looking creatures. I don't think this is necessarily the best one, but I will say 5 mana, the stats are kind of there, right? 5 mana, 6/5. It tramples, so it's more easy to proc or trigger, whatever word you like to use. So kind of like that, even if you only hit a couple of cards off of it, right, you're going to be able to put something on the table most of the time. Even if you quote whiff and hit a land, you still get to ramp. That's pretty sweet. There's also no actual like restrictions as to what you can throw down, right? So like you hit a Titan of Industry or like some other like 8 mana card, like sure, it's yours. You can play it. It's fine. It's fine. So that's pretty great. So long as you hit the right, card types, you can do whatever you want with them. So that's a little bit gross. The dude has to wait to swing though. So I guess there is that theoretically, but if it stays on the board more than a turn or two, it threatens a lot and your opponent can't just throw a body in front of it to keep it from proccing. So if it gets through, it's going to put more card advantage or more, board advantage on the table for you. Gets through again, more board advantage. So your opponent has to do something about it. If they can't exile it, it will very likely be back again. Although getting 10 permanents is harder than it sounds, but you can get there, most of the way in lands a lot of the time in the late game. So it's not that hard if the game goes long enough. One way or the other, I do like this dude. Super grindy little value and massive threat. I will say this too, if he's getting through for combat damage and trampling over or whatever, not only are you filling the table up with stuff, but you're also attacking with a 6-power dude multiple turns in a row. So that also tends to end the game after a while. So I do like this dude. I don't think he's like, the thing that makes green playable in standard again. I think we've already seen a few of those. And this guy might be part of the puzzle, but again, not like the thing. But he is undeniably very good. But now let's move on to Thousand Moons Smithy. That's a name for a card. It really is. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for a legendary artifact. When it ETBs, create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you may tap 5 untapped artifacts and or creatures. If you do, transform that you control. If you do, transform the Moon Smithy into Barracks of the Thousand. This is a legendary artifact land that taps for a white. Whenever you cast an artifact or creature spell using mana produced by this land, create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures that you control. So, woo! Seems pretty nutty, man. That is okay, dude. You can actually flip this over the turn it comes into play. So that's a little bit neat, right? It also says that you don't have to tap other artifacts or creatures, so you can tap the token that it gives you. The turn it comes into play, too. That's how this ability works. It's not summoning sick to just tapping, but it is. Summoning Sickness works differently. I'm probably going to get some weirdos who are relatively new. But yeah, for abilities like Convoke and things that just say tap a creature, the creature can be Summoning Sick and still tap. It just can't tap to attack or use its own activated abilities. But if a thing just says tap a creature, it can be Summoning Sick and tap. That's totally fine. So I know most of you know that. I've already gotten some pushback on this thought this season, so I want to more deeply explain it. But one way or the other, you can theoretically flip this over the turn it comes into play. If you play stuff like Resolute Reinforcements or creatures that put an artifact onto the table when they come into play, I could actually see getting this on curve flipped over. And that's kind of unbelievable because when you do start tapping this and casting stuff with it, then suddenly every time, like at least once a turn, if you can untap this land in some way or another and cast another spell with it, then like Boffo, but like at least once a turn, you're going to get a reasonably big guy. Like even after the sweeper, it taps to cast a thing and make a 1/1. And then after that, it casts a thing and makes a 2/2, So like, I'm telling you, dude, this thing actually looks really, really good. One of the easy, better cards that we've seen of the day so far. You do have to facilitate it a bit, but note that you don't even have to really be playing artifacts in your deck. This doesn't have to be in like the mono white artifacts deck I keep yammering on about this season. It doesn't have to do that. Just play creatures in your deck, and suddenly you have this thing that in the mid and late game actually gives you this like massive amount of reach so long as you can keep casting spells. So I'm kind of into it more than a little bit, if you can't tell. I'm very excited for a bunch of cards in this set, and this is one of them. Hey, Deb, can we see some more artifact stuff? Yeah, I got you. Don't worry, bud. Here's Fabrication Foundry. 1 and a white for an artifact. Now, you can tap it for a white mana, but you can only spend that mana to cast an artifact spell or activate an ability of an artifact. Don't worry. That's still pretty decent. You can also pay 2 a white and tap it and exile 1 or more other artifacts you control with total mana value X. To return target artifact card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, but you can only activate this as a sorcery. That is fine. I'm just going to be getting back like portals to Phyrexia. If I sacrifice enough stuff, I mean, you do have to sacrifice a whole buttload, scientific term, of things to actually make that happen, but you can make that happen. And there's multiple, like, 4 to 6 mana artifacts that are way easier to nab with something like this that still nonetheless I think are worth using this to get. But even if you never actually craft it, it's still a 2 mana rock in standard for your artifacts deck. So if you are building like artifact ramp, this obviously goes in, but just like artifact mid-range or something like that, an artifact deck that isn't completely skewed aggro will almost always play this card. It's kind of like a Giada for artifacts. I mean, we've already, I believe, got a creature in standard that taps for colorless, and you can only play artifact spells with it. But this isn't a creature, which I actually think is better for your 2 mana rock to not be a creature because it can't be killed by like cut down or whatever. So it's a little bit more stable in terms of ramp, and I like that a good bit. So huge fan. Can't really sing its praises enough. It does way more than just be a 2 mana rock, but if that's all it is, that's fine. It's all you really need it to be. But ultimately later on in the game, just being able to trade it in, with something that you'd rather have out of your yard, I think is a pretty awesome thing to be able to do. Now we're only down to a couple of cards left on the day, barring any like reloads on Mythic Spoiler or whatever. So that means we are down to my favorite cards. And that is definitely true of Trumpet and Carnosaur. Have you seen this? Have you heard about this? 6 mana, 4 and 2 red for a 7/6 Dino with trample. And when it enters the battlefield, discover 5. Okay. You can also, though, and this is the interesting part, this is the interesting part. Pay 2 and a red and discard Trumpet and Carnosaur from your hand to have it deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. It's a reanimation spell that discards itself and does something really relevant too, and you can discard it at instant speed too. So like on your opponent's combat step, I want to discard my giant dinosaur, bolt that guy, thanks. And then like the next turn, or the turn after at the very least, you can reanimate him. And not only do you get a 7/6 trample, which I think is actually like super duper relevant to have trample on this guy. They can't just jump block him, right? But he also puts something else into play. He's like a baby Itali, right? Like maybe I shouldn't be that excited because all he is just worse Itali in a lot of ways. But Itali is not an early to mid game removal spell. And this guy is, again, a reanimation spell that discards itself, or a reanimation target that discards itself. Like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I get to be excited about that. Me, I like reanimating guys, especially when they're big fat dinosaurs that put something else into play. So even if your opponent does deal with your 7/6 trampler, they got to deal with something else too, or whatever, some spell that you cast. So again, baby's first Itali and all that, but the fact that this is kind of like a Itali mixed up with like a bone crusher giant, like not exactly, but again, like basically channel bolt that thing is really, really good when you plan to just play him out of your graveyard later anyway and get more value. Come on, man. I don't know how you could not be excited about this guy. I really like this dude. Well, let's move on to my favorite card of the day so far. It's Cutzel's Flanker. 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/1 cat warrior with flash. When it ETBs, choose 1. Put a +1/+1 counter on Cutzel's Flanker for each creature that left the battlefield under your control this turn. Or you gain 2 life and scry 2. Or exile target player's graveyard. Okay, so I don't think that the creature type is ruining my objectivity on this one. I think it's just a solid dude, and the flash matters. Oh my god, the flash is what's actually making this good, right? I mean, first of all, it's sweeper protection, and it's worded correctly too. It's not like creatures that died or anything. It's creatures that left the battlefield. So if you get hit by Sunfall, Farewell, whatever, you flash this in, and suddenly it's got like 6 or 7 power. That seems okay. So let's just, right there, great mode. But also exiling graveyards and stuff with flash, so you can respond to the reanimation spell or whatever. You can respond to them about to do something with descend or whatever. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of like different stuff that you might want to use instant speed to interact with the graveyard with while something else is on the stack in the current environment. So just that ability is pretty sweet too. And even the gain 2 scry 2 is kind of nice. I imagine this is going to be used, this middle mode, kind of like a pseudo Wandering Emperor some of the time. I don't have 4 mana, but I got 3 mana. So I'm going to flash this guy in. I'm going to gain 2. I'm going to scry 2, and then I'm going to block with him and trade, right? So again, you removed one of their guys. you gain 2 life. So it kind of feels like you played the Wandering Emperor, even though you didn't exile the guy or leave a Planeswalker behind. But I think you understand the comparison I'm trying to make. That will happen during your opponent's combat step. I think quite a bit with this card. And let's not discount the Scry too either, you know? Like if you're currently kind of on the back foot and you have to use this card that way, then the Scry 2 is going to be really, really good for helping you find the Sunfall, removal spell, big guy, whatever. So that actually, I think, is going to be a fairly popular mode on this, the middle mode, because the other 2 modes are kind of specialized to different things that might be going on in a game of Magic, whereas the middle mode is just like value anyone can enjoy. So I think it's really sweet, whether it's like flashing in to beat down the control opponent that just like resolves Sunfall, or, you know, it's flashing in while Cruelty of Gix is on the stack or something like that. Or if it's just flashing in to like beat up a mono red guy and gain 2 or whatever. That's a whole lot of really relevant situations in the current standard against a ton of decks. So I do think this ends up seeing some play. It's just almost always good. It never has nothing to do. Set continues to look pretty decent. Even if you get a stinker or 2 from time to time, most of the cards in this thing look pretty ridiculous, right? And like a lot of the, you know, actual rares and mythics today were just like bananas as usual. So let me know what your favorite stuff from the day was and any interactions or anything like that I missed. Hit me up with those in the comments section. It's important, right? There's a bunch of stuff I miss. I'm not perfect, nowhere near. So let me know what I didn't talk about, which is kind of the most important thing some of the time down there. But anything I did say that sounded fishy to you, let me know. I've already issued a correction or 2 this season. I'll do it again if I have to. But just let me know how you felt about like all the takes and all the cards from today down there, and then do all the YouTube stuff on your way out. Like the video, hit the subscribe button if you haven't done it yet. Maybe hit the bell for the notifications if you haven't done that. I bet a lot of you haven't done that. Hit the bell. You can also check me out on Twitch, where we're going to be reviewing and ranking every single card in this set, I believe, on our next stream, probably sometime this weekend. Stop by. Watch me put myself through something I really shouldn't be doing, but you know, you guys seem to be entertained by it. Aside from that, following's free. Aside from that, you can check me out on Patreon, where $1 a month is all I really ask, and you can vote on what decks we do once Lost Caverns of Ixalan is fully out and on the streets and all that stuff. It's a good thing to be able to do. Affect the course of YouTube history and all that. Just $1 a month. It helps out more than you can possibly imagine. Seriously, please. But aside from that, I am done. Am I actually done? It's pretty good. It's actually record self-promotion. Anyway, love you guys, and I'll see you again tomorrow with more Lost Caverns spoilers, but we are almost in the clear here. I think Thursday is the last day, and then we got to rank all the cards, do top 10 sweepers, top 25 cards, start doing decks. The work is just beginning at this point, but in any case, I'm done. I should stop. I love you. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.